My name is Krista Fernando, and I'm a second-year Cook Leadership Academy Fellow and a biomedical science major here at Grand Valley. As you might already know, the Hounstein Center's Wheelhouse Talks highlight the philosophies and experiences of leaders from a variety of disciplines, communities, and cultures. We invite these individuals to take center stage and share their experiences, stories, and perspectives with us. Their lessons help us to chart our own paths forward and provide a blueprint toward developing and reaching our own goals. The Wheelhouse Talks are a space for this reflection and innovative learning. They are a call to arms for anyone seeking to create positive change within themselves and their world, as well as a celebration of human endeavors and the potential within each of us. Now, to introduce our speaker. Dr. Deborah Furr-Holden is the Interim Director of the Division of Public Health and the Director of the Flint Center for Health Equity Solutions, in addition to being one of the C.S. Mott Endowed Professors of Public Health at Michigan State University. She also serves as MSU's Director of the Healthy Flint Research Coordinating Center. Dr. Furr-Holden is an epidemiologist and classically trained public health professional with specific expertise in drug and alcohol dependence epidemiology, psychiatric epidemiology, and prevention science. She attended the Johns Hopkins University Krieger School of Arts and Sciences, where she earned her BA in Natural Sciences and Public Health. She then went on to receive her PhD from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in 1999. In 2005, she initiated the Drug Investigations, Violence, and Environmental Studies Laboratory at the Pacific Institute for Research and Evaluation and transitioned with the group to the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in 2007. When she came to the Division of Public Health, she quickly began working with grassroots community partners as well as academic partners within and outside of Michigan State University. As a former Flint resident, she has a commitment to the city that began early in adolescence. Her work in Flint focuses on policy-level interventions that promote behavioral health equity. Her research is rooted in the principles and practices of community-based participatory research, and she aims to conduct her research with the community and other research partners, not to them or for them. In the wake of the Flint water crisis, she has sought to use her expertise in universal and targeted school-based interventions, community-based participatory approaches to public health, and targeted school-based interventions that she uses with her action-oriented research to form policy interventions to advance the public health status of Flint's community. Dr. Furr-Holden is the recipient of the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers in 2007 for her work in substance abuse research and with the Neighborhood Inventory for Environmental Typology. Throughout her career, Dr. Furr-Holden has worked with local and national policymakers to improve data-driven decision-making across a broad range of behavioral health topics to ultimately include health equity in all policies. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Deborah Furr-Holden to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I got a little bit moved hearing that introduction. I said, she's pretty awesome. I don't say that lightly, but I do think, I remember being where you are and sort of being at the stage. And when I say where you are, I'm specifically speaking to the students because all I ever really had was a fire in my belly and a big commitment. I didn't sort of know where I'd end up, and I don't think that story is all the way written. So my thing today is I'm going to tell one on myself. I'm going to pull the curtain back a little bit. I hope to leave you touched and moved and inspired by my story, not because it's about me, but I ask that you listen for what might be possible for you. Because when I started off, I didn't know I'd end up here. And like I said, I'm not done. So I titled this Every Day is a Winding Road, because I started off in this very straight path. I don't know if you captured this, but I'm going to skip one slide and then I'm going to come back. I got my bachelor's degree in 1996, and I got my doctorate in 1999. It doesn't get any more direct than that. I graduated high school in 1992, right? 4 years later, I got my bachelor's degree, and 3 years after that, I got my doctorate. So at some point, I got really clear what I was up to, and I went straight for it. But I'll tell you, it's been a windy road ever since. So I'm Deborah Furr-Holden. I'm a C.S. Mott Endowed Professor of Public Health. I've been in that position for almost 3 years. It took me about this much time to be able to say it without being embarrassed. I used to say, I'm a C.S. Mott Endowed Professor of Public Health. right? Because as an academic, an endowed professorship is like the thing you want. It's like the big thing. You've arrived. And it took me a while to even be comfortable in my own skin to be able to say that. But I say it now with great pride because the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation made a massive investment in public health in Flint, which we hope will be a big investment for public health all across the state. I'm also the interim director of the Division of Public Health, and I tell people interim means nothing. The division that I direct at MSU, I've been in that position for a year. I have an interim director of my Institute of Health Policy who's been the interim director for 8 years. MSU is an interesting place. When there's a call to leadership, people just sort of jump in and take the reins. So I will not be the interim director for 8 years, but I am the director of the Division of Public Health, and I also direct the Flint Center for Health Equity Solutions. You will notice there might be a few pictures of me here and there. I will never have the same hairstyle twice. Kadar met me at a different event, and I'm sure I had a different hairstyle then. It's a part of my self-expression. But yeah, so two of my favorite quotes. Health and public health have been in my bone marrow since I was a little kid. I was always interested in what it is that has people and communities be healthy. And so two of my favorite quotes. One is that the first wealth is health. And I also have a big commitment to economic development. And people cannot be wealthy. You cannot have wealth in a community if you do not have health in that community. So I love that quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. And then another quote from Winston Churchill, who's another one of my sort of heroes, is healthy citizens are the greatest asset that any country can have. And I direct the Center for Flint Health Equity Solutions because we have big, massive gaps in the experience and opportunity for health and well-being. And to me, health is a privilege. It's not a privilege, it's a right. We are entitled to good health. It shouldn't be a privilege. But the way it plays out in our country and across the world, it sort of is. I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm here to tell one on myself and share a little bit about my journey and what I've learned. So my background and training, I graduated high school in '92. I went to Johns Hopkins. I was a natural sciences and public health pre-med major. I thought I was going to impact health vis-a-vis medicine. I had never heard of public health. I happen to know for a fact because the division that I direct also has a fully online MPH program. And I think our biggest competitor is Grand Valley State University. You have a nice hybrid program that is CEF accredited, that actually is way out in front in the state of Michigan. So you all should be proud of that. You're doing great things around public health here. But I never heard of public health. I stumbled into public health at the end of my sophomore year in college. And it was a done deal. I was like, this is it. This is actually what I want to do. And so I graduated in 1996. And as soon as I found out about public health, I switched my major. I started taking classes at the Graduate School of Public Health, and I went and got a job there. At the time, I was working in the dining hall because it was a union job, and they paid more than any of the student jobs paid. So I took a pay cut, and I went to work at the School of Public Health, and then 3 years later, I got my PhD in 1999 in drug and alcohol epidemiology, and I did a one-year postdoc in psychiatric epidemiology and a one-year postdoc in prevention science. And then started the windy road. So I got really clear about, the field of study and what I wanted to do. The question was, where was I actually going to work and get that expressed? And so, the academy is what I knew, right? I went to Johns Hopkins for undergraduate, went about 5 miles east to the medical campus and got my public health degree. So of course I sort of stayed at Hopkins and I took a faculty position there. And it felt like more of the same because this was all I knew. I tell people all the time I was professionally born and raised at Johns Hopkins. So it was very comfortable and familiar. And so then I decided I really wanted to focus on underserved populations. That was really my passion. I am the daughter of a DC cop and a secretary in DC. My dad died at 37 of a ruptured brain aneurysm. My mom died at 56 of an asthma attack. At 35, I had no living parents and grandparents. That is the walking embodiment of health disparities, right? And so I decided I wanted to go to a historically black college university and really work with the nation's leading African-American scholars and understand health equity and health disparities. And I got some really great training there and some really great lenses. The problem is Morgan State University is a really great place to get that footing, but it is not a research-intensive university. I wanted to be at the forefront of the research that was being done in these populations, as well as the translation and dissemination of that work. So I left Morgan. I actually went to a place called the Pacific Institute for Research and Evaluation, because what I knew I needed was to really hone my research skills. I didn't want to have to teach. I didn't want to have to serve on committees. I wanted to really hone my skills as a researcher. And I went there, and that's where I really got my start as a researcher. And I'll tell you what that looked like. And I stayed there for a few years, and then I said, great, I got what I need. Now I need to get back in the place where I can get that difference expressed. And I went back to Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. It's a great thing, because, you know, I left, I took what I got, I left, I went out in the world, I added to that, and then I came back, but I actually brought something very unique and new back to Hopkins, which was this new lens in this world that was opening up called health disparities and health equity. And I will tell you, when I left Johns Hopkins in 2015, we were in the midst of celebrating our centennial. It was the 100-year anniversary of the Bloomberg School of Public Health. And in 100 years, they had only had one black full professor in the 100-year history of the school. And it was really interesting, because I think take any other group and replace that with that group, and your skin would crawl. Let's just practice. They had only had one female full professor in the 100-year history of the school. People would be up in arms, right? But I actually left that institution as the sole black full professor in the 100-year history. And so I went back to Hopkins, and then while I was at Hopkins, I decided I wanted to not only just do research, but I wanted to be able to practice and put into practice what I had learned. So it's a bidirectional arrow. While I was at Johns Hopkins, we brokered a deal with the city of Baltimore, and I actually became the director of prevention for the city of Baltimore. So I was the only person in the institution that had a full-time gig as a professor, and I also had a full-time gig with the city, and I was the director of prevention. I actually implemented the opioid overdose prevention program, and in the face of a massive opioid epidemic that's happening nationally, Baltimore has remained stable. And it's a big part of the system that I put in place, which was evidence driven by all of these sort of routes that I took on my windy road. I then left Johns Hopkins in 2015 because I was aggressively recruited to come back to Flint, Michigan, and be a Spartan in this new public health bill that they had put up in Flint, Michigan. I lived in Flint as a teenager. My mom moved here, married a man that she met in DC who was also from DC, but he came to Flint, hitchhiked when he was 19 years old. He got a job at Truck and Bustle and Van Slyke in Flint, if anybody knows Flint. And he retired from that job after 47 years working on the line. I moved here from DC as an adolescent. I hated it. Moving from DC to Flint was like the biggest culture shock of my life. I thought I'd never come back here. I came back, my mom is deceased, like I said, but when I came back to visit, right, I get all these calls and these emails. I said, listen, I would be happy to come and do like a visiting professorship or something like that, but I really can't. Who would leave Johns Hopkins to come to Flint? I wouldn't care if it was the Hopkins Flint campus. I'm not moving to Flint, right? And so I came back, and it was really interesting for me because the house that we lived in when I lived in Flint, so I didn't like it. So I moved after 2 years. My mom stayed and lived in Flint for 17 years. I went to the street that I lived on. It was the only house my mother had ever owned. It was her pride and joy. And I went to that street, and I was heartbroken. About 2/3 of the houses on that street were abandoned. The big centerpiece house of the block that was on the corner had burned down, and nobody even bothered to sort of clear away the debris. It was just this sort of shell of a burned up house that was there. It looked nothing like it did when I lived there. I remember when my mom had the driveway put in, when she had the shutters put up, when she had the roof redone. I remember when she went from the gravel driveway and actually had it paved. It looked nothing like that. It was a heartbreak for me because this was the only house that my mom ever owned. And the city that she loved, my mom loved Flint, had completely fallen into disrepair. Massive economic divestment and all kinds of other issues had really put Flint on its backside. And so when I came for this sort of let's just go check it out visit, something really got ignited in me. And I actually realized that big commitment that I had to health, it wasn't about where I lived. It was about being in a place where the things that matter to me and the skill sets that I have would be wanted and needed. It was like one of those moments where you sort of look yourself in the mirror and you really get a chance to true up to who you say you are. And I realized there was a part of me that liked saying I was the only black professor at Johns Hopkins, right? There was a part of me that liked what came with my Hopkins, credential and status. But there was also a part of me that was not wholly fulfilled knowing that who I was somebody who could make a profound difference in the landscape of public health, and that there were places like Flint that needed people like me who could garner the trust and the kind of credibility that you would need to actually roll your sleeves up and do the work on the ground floor. And so I set my ego to the side and I actually authentically went through the process of engaging with the search committee, engaging with the community members, and I actually gave it a fair shot. And lo and behold, 4 months later, I was worried that they wouldn't pick me. And I ended up moving to Flint, so now I'm a Spartan. All right, so this is not a game for winners. I want to tell you that. I'm a soft money researcher. My public health division is endowed by the Mott Foundation, and they put up initially about $9 million. There was a total $12 million investment between the Mott Foundation, the 3 area hospitals, the Flint community. Everybody sort of said, we know we need this, right? We need to sort of turn the corner economically in Flint, and we also realize that we can't do that if we don't sort of deal with the health challenges and the public health challenges that Flint is facing. And so I went back and I pulled up my grant history, right? Because as a soft money researcher, it is up to me. We wrangle up our own supper. I will tell you the average hit rate at the NIH, it used to be 12%. It varies somewhere between 12 and 18% by the second resubmission. So you will have your brilliant ideas that are based on all of the things that you've learned, great science, great writing. You will pour all of that, your heart and soul and all of your brilliance on paper into an application. You will send it off. It'll go through something called peer review. And you are hopeful that those peers are people who have similar values and background and training and qualifications to review your work. And then, if the highest hit rate is 18%, that means about 82% of the time, your peers will say, not good enough. And you will get a big X, a no, coming back to you. So if you look at my grant system, and the big system is called ERA Commons, which is where all of the federal, sort of grants are managed. I have about a 35% hit rate. I have 1 grant that's listed as pending, 7 that were never even discussed. That means my brilliance, my heart, my soul that I put on paper, I sent in, and they didn't even think it merited a conversation. It wasn't even worth a conversation. I had 2 things that I submitted, and they got discussed. They said, maybe. They set it on the shelf. It never made it further than that. I had 2 things that were went through the whole process. They said, yes, we want to fund it, and then something happened, and it didn't get funded. And then I had 12 things that were talked about, discussed, sat on a shelf. It would have been in this category here. It would have been in this category here. But after it sat on the shelf for so long, somebody said, let's just throw it in the garbage. And so I had 12 like that, and I had 8 grants that got awarded. And that makes me it gives me about a 35% hit rate. So you got to think, I'm a rock star. Like, I'm not like bragging. I'm a rock star in the field of public health, right? The highest hit rate for NIH grants by second submission is about 18%. I'm about twice that. That means I have to be with failure 65% of the time. Do you know who you have to be to play a game where you're losing 65% of the time, but you still have the will to get up and keep playing and keep fighting? I tell people, think of it in terms of baseball stats. If there's a guy who's batting 3,500 over a 20-year career, that's a Hall of Famer, right? That guy's getting up to bat, and 65% of the time he's not making it on base. But the 35% of the time that he is qualifies him for the Hall of Fame. That's the game that I'm in. If you want to play the games where you're really up to making a difference in the world, you have to expand your capacity to be with failure. Because the game is not a game for winners. It's a game for players. It's a game for people who say, my commitment is bigger than my ego, and I'm willing to fail and get back up and keep playing. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what to do with the failures in the end. I wanted to give you the age of these things because my capacity to be with failure was very, very weak in my youth. And different people would say I'm still in my youth. It doesn't feel like that. I actually have my 20-year-old daughter here with me today. She drove me, bless her heart. And I'm 44 now. But my history looks like this. I got my first grant actually when I was 20. I was an undergraduate, and I found public health, and I said, oh, I really want to work in public health. So I didn't know what to do. We had a shuttle bus that used to drive us from the undergraduate campus to the medical campus. And I just took the shuttle bus down to the public health campus, and I got off, and there was a security guard on the corner, and I said, where are the public health buildings at? And he said, oh, there's one right there that was right next to me, and then there's one about 3 blocks up the street, the main building. And I said, well, this one's right here, so I'm just going to go in. And I literally went in, and I started walking the floors, and I looked at people's names on the walls, and I figured out who was who. And I said, oh, he's got a big office. He must be important. Well, and I took some notes, and then I went back home, and this is probably strange and unfamiliar to you all, but I will tell you, when I was an undergraduate at Hopkins my freshman year, we used to get everything in this thing called a mailbox. It was actually a physical box, and they would write us letters, and the letters would go in the mailbox. And one day I went to my mailbox, and the letter said, we will no longer be putting letters in your mailbox. They will be in your electronic mailbox. And you can go to the Krieger Computer Lab to access your electronic mailbox. And I took the letter, and I went over to Krieger, and I said, could you show me where my electronic mailbox is? And the proctor in the lab said, yeah, you can get it on any one of the computers. I said, you put my mail on every computer in this lab? And they gave me something called an electronic mail address, because I no longer had a physical mail address. And you all now call that email. But I'm not kidding you. It was my freshman year in college when Hopkins made the transition from what you now call snail mail to email or electronic mail. So that was very, very real for me. So about a year after that, at the age of 20, I found public health, and I said, I want to do public health. I love this stuff. It's like, I thought I wanted to do medicine. Medicine is great. It's health at the level of the individual or the family. Public health is the health at the level of community and population. Went down, met some folks, went back to that same computer lab, got on what back then we called the World Wide Web. That's what we called it when I was a freshman, the World Wide Web. And the buzz was that the military had created this elaborate system of communications where computers could talk to one another and share information. So I said, I wonder if I can find information about the people who I wrote their names down when I walked the halls at the School of Public Health. And back then, it used to be called the School of Hygiene and Public Health. But I said, let me see if I can find some information on the World Wide Web about these folks. And I did. There wasn't a lot of information, but there was enough for me to figure out who were the right people for me to sort of talk to about how I could create a career in public health. So I went down, and I met this really great guy by the name of Jim Anthony, and he said, oh, yeah, like, we'd love to have you, but we don't have money. We're soft money around here. But I have a couple grants, and if you're interested, I can tell you how to write a grant to supplement one of my grants, and if you can pay your own way, you can work here. So I wrote the grant. I was actually 19 at the time. It got funded right after I turned 20, and it was what used to be called a minority supplement. Now they're called diversity supplements, because we know diversity is not just about race and ethnicity. There's all kinds of other things, sexual gender minorities, people from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, et cetera. And so I got that grant at 20, and I just kept my foot on the gas. And I got a similar grant. Ended up getting a fellowship that paid for my graduate school. And I got a similar grant to fund my early faculty work because I got my doctorate at 24. So at 25, I have an early award for faculty. And then I started writing my own independent grants. And I just stayed that course all the way up to now. And at 43, I became the interim director of the Division of Public Health at MSU. There's rewards that come with this. I started doing the kind of work, not that others thought I should do. One of the traps in the sort of world that I'm operating in is you want to jump on the bandwagon. When you're a soft money person, you have to have what I call the sweet spot, and I'll tell you a little bit more in a second about what that is. But I spent a lot of time and I wasted a lot of time writing grants that I didn't necessarily really want to do, but that I thought I could get funded to do. That didn't work out. So the very first grant that I wrote, which right here, it's called the NIFTY, the Neighborhood Inventory for Environmental Typology, got awarded on April 1st of 2005. I was 30 years old. I ended up a few years later winning a presidential award for that. So that's me. I'm that little brown drop in the front, and that's George Bush. I got to hang out with George Bush at the White House. And 13 of us actually had the grants that we had at that time. My award, and I was the top recipient, came with an extra $3.5 million grant. It was like amazing, right? And for doing the kind of work that I want to do. And so the thing that I always tell people is it's really important. Yeah, it's hard to stay true to yourself when you're figuring things out, right? Because you want to be true to yourself, but you're like, well, what does that even mean? I'm not quite sure exactly what I want to do and who I am. And everybody here came from somebody. You have parents or grandparents. And in my family, they said, oh, you talk so much, you're going to be a lawyer. You're going to be a great lawyer. You're going to be the first black Supreme Court justice. And then I was like, there's a guy, Thurgood Marshall. I think he took that one already. And then they switched it. You'll be the first female Supreme Court. And I was like, there's a Sandra Day. I think she took that one. So like, there was everything that everybody thought I should be doing. There was what my professors were saying. And then there was like that little rustling down in my soul. And it was hard for me to hear that because there's a whole lot of other noise happening around me. So what I always encourage people to do, and I didn't create this graphic. I have my own sort of bootleg version of it that I'm going to show you in a sec, is to keep in mind the things that you're great at, the things that you love. In an ideal world, it will map onto something that's wanted and needed in the world as well. And if you want to be in the academy, or if you really want to be viable, it should also be something that you can get paid for. Because I fundamentally believe people don't have to be poor to do what you love. So if you can find where all those things come together, you might find a sense of purpose. And it is the most rewarding thing ever. I could do other things that would pay me more money, but it wouldn't be as fulfilling. So I had to find that balance for myself of something that I'm great at, that I love, that's wanted and needed in the world, and that I can actually get paid for. Because these kids of mine have college tuitions and the like. So what I call it in my professional world is the sweet spot. And that is what I'm great at, what brings me joy, and what will people pay me enough to do. And that's the sweet spot for me, and I'm sort of living in that right now. And I will tell you, I didn't give you all the winding roads, but that was the main path. I've done a whole lot of consulting work. Academia is not the place where you go to make a boatload of money. I think there's a couple people in the biomedical sciences that end up with patents and inventions. Although if you're at a university, they own the majority of that. So do not look for a career in academia as the place to get rich. And I don't think most of us end up in academia because that's the goal. But I do think all three of these things are important, and I think they're also all simultaneously achievable. And I tell people, I wouldn't give up any one of them. I wouldn't take my dream job if it had me living like a pauper, right? I wouldn't take a job that paid me a whole lot of money if it was doing something that I didn't love. I think you really can have all three of them. All right, so some of the keys to the kingdom that I figured out that I wanted to share with you all is get a great mentor or mentors. I didn't do this by myself. I mentioned the name Jim Anthony, but actively right now, I have 4 people who by declaration, are my mentors right now. Everybody that's successful in the world has somebody that's pulling for them and that's a champion for them. Make a plan with those mentors. And that plan shouldn't just be about your professional growth and development. It should include your whole life. Why? Because your whole life is happening at the exact same time as your career. And what you're going to find is really interesting is when you start to peak with your career is when you will also start to peak in your personal life. It's when you will predictably marry the love of your life or enter into some kind of committed partnership or, whatever relationship, expresses you. It may be for some of you when you start to have children. It may be for some of you when you start to take over the care of elderly parents or grandparents. Your entire life is always going to be happening all at the same time. And it's a really interesting point when you start to get into that sweet spot in your career, a lot of those other things in life start to happen. And a great mentor won't help you figure all of that stuff out, but that will be a part of the overall plan. I will tell you, as a woman, I had 3 kids in 4 years. I had 3 kids in 4 years. Literally, the way publications work is if you want to know how productive somebody was in 2012, you see what they published in 2013. That's how that worked. So every year that I had a kid, the next year I had no publications. And I didn't actually figure that out until I sort of looked, because I've been trying to I'm like, well, what do I actually know? What have I learned along this pathway that I could actually share with people? And it's because that was a mistake that I made in the beginning. I wasn't including my whole life in the plan. But my whole life was happening and there was an impact. And if I had included it in the plan, I predictably could have had it go some other way. So you plan your work and then you work your plan. But you don't work your plan like, this is the only way that it can go. This is the only way that it can be. But I also don't advocate for people to just sort of be out here hopeful, wishful that it's all going to work out. You're all young and smart and good looking and all that stuff right now. It changes. You are in your prime right now, physically, right? And so it changes. So you want to plan your work and sort of work that plan, because you have the say over how your life is going to go. You don't want to be at the effect of things. And the cool thing about being the author of your own plan is you can be the author of the rewrite as well. But you should have some idea about what's pulling you forward. And I always say a great resume / bio goes a really long, long way. Do not count the benefit of the accomplishments that you will garner along the way. So if you think that your role or the work that you're doing in your lab, your research group, with a mentor, that paper that you're writing for class is insignificant, it's not. I was pretty surprised to find out along the way the impact of some of my early work. I did a thesis as an undergraduate that ended up getting picked up by the New York Times. It was like a conversation game changer. I didn't know that that was going to be the case. The way that ended up happening is I did that work, and I did that work with integrity. So, we'll talk about integrity in just a second. But a great resume bio goes a long, long way. And you should keep that up to date and in real time. Everything that you do professionally, you should be asking yourself, where does this go on my bio? All of the things that you do. You help to organize this session, that should be on your bio. Stay encouraged. You're going to have a whole lot of things along the way that'll do what I call getting you off your square. Don't fall off your square. You can stumble, you can trip, get right back on your square. Again, remember what I said, this is not a game for winners. It's a game for players. Celebrate all the victories and mostly forget all of the failures after you've gleaned a lesson. If you take something on and it goes horribly wrong, do not dwell on it. Be willing to take a look and figure out what, if anything, did you learn from that. Take the lesson and forget the failure. But every single victory that you have, you should be celebrating. Why? Because if you're like me, a rock star, you're going to fail at least 65% of the time. If you're a Hall of Famer, you're going to be failing about 65% of the time. So you can't dwell on those failures. You just want to take the lesson, take a look at it, glean what you can, take that with you, forget about it, and then celebrate all the victories. And balance, and we'll talk about balance. A quick note on mentors and advisors. Who here is a great mentor? Whoa, I'm gonna say it again. Who has a great mentor? Are your mentors not in the room? Okay, great. All right, great mentors are essential. If you don't have one, that's the thing that I would encourage you to get when you leave here. And fit matters. Somebody could be a great mentor for your roommate and a terrible mentor for you because the fit's not there. They have different values or there's personality differences. They're in a completely different content area. Take none of that stuff personal. But everybody that I know that's successful had a great mentor helping them to figure things out. And they're available. You just have to do the work and be intentional about finding them. One size doesn't fit all, and different people might be good for different things. You might have a mentor who's really great at helping you establish work, school, life balance. And then you might have another mentor that's really great at helping you to be productive professionally. So you don't have to have one mentor who's your end-all, be-all for everything, but just don't tolerate not having support. If you can verbalize a concern or a gap, it's now on you to get that gap filled. If you can say, I don't really know what I want to do next. You know, I actually started off biomedical engineering pre-med. I thought I wanted to make movable prosthetic parts for people who had lost limbs. And I couldn't quite, I was like, it sounded good. That essay surely got me into Hopkins with a full ride. But then when I started getting into it, I was like, this is not really what I wanted to do. And I looked around at my colleagues and I was like, I don't want to work with these people for the next 50 years. Really, that was real. And it was a biomedical engineering professor who did that work with me to help me figure that out. He was the one who helped me figure out and find public health, right? What's the minimum number of mentors? There's no real answer here, except you need at least one. You need at least one great one. And then you ask for what you need. So mentoring and mentors are not, it's not an entitlement, it's not a right. You should ask people for what you need. If what you need from a mentor is somebody who's really going to help you chart your career path or help you get into medical school or help you get into business school or help you get into graduate school, ask for that. And that mentor might say, no, that's really not my thing. I really want to work with students around publications, or I really want to work with students around research projects, or I really want to work with students around developing new pedagogy in our department or something like that. So you should ask people for what it is that you need. And if you're not clear on what you need, that's the conversation you have with them. Can you help me figure out what it is that I need? And then you ask them. Because if they say no, that's a great thing. Because you don't have to keep wasting time there. You can go on and get somebody else who will be a yes. I always tell people expectations are a one-way road to disappointment. Do not expect for people to understand or know what your needs are. You ask. And if they say no, you move on. If they say yes, great. You enter into that relationship and you can hold people accountable for what it is that they've agreed to do. And I always say no means nothing. I think no is the best thing. One of my favorite groups of people are the people who are a no and are a straight no and an immediate no, because then I can move on. What's worse is when, have you ever asked somebody for something like, hey, I'm moving this weekend and, I need some friends to help out. Can you help me? And they say, well, my foot hurts and maybe if it feels better, I'll sort of let you know. And then you're in the back of your mind, like hoping it's going to work out. And then on Saturday, it's you and your sister and you're like struggling. Whereas if that person had been like, no way, dude, that is not me at all. My girlfriend's going to be in town. I am not helping you move. You might have moved on and asked some other people. No means nothing. I think no is actually a good thing because it gives you an opportunity to go and get yeses in other places. I already said plan your work and work your plan. You should have agenda-driven meetings. This is some of the practical stuff. I don't know if you do this, but I don't meet with any of my mentees, whether they be undergraduates, graduates. I mentor a bunch of medical students. I have a resident. And when I meet with my dean and my provost, I have agendas for all of those meetings. And the subsequent meeting is the follow-up in the agenda to any action items from that meeting, and then the agenda for the meeting that we have then. It is my best attempt to show them that I honor and appreciate their time and attention. I took to heart what we had already talked about. I'm building on it, and here's what I now need moving forward. And I normally update this. When I'm talking to sort of junior faculty, I tell them they need a 5 and a 10-year plan. For undergraduates and graduate students, 5 to 10 years might be too far. 5 to 10 years might seem like someday, one day, maybe-ish. But at a minimum, you should have a 1 to 3 year plan. You should know what it is that you're up to for this year. You have to already be in that world because you at least have to figure out what you're up to for the semester. But I don't think you need to be managing just what's right in front of you. You kind of need something a little bit further out to help pull you forward. So whatever makes sense for you, but the key is you need to have something out in the future that's giving you what you're doing today. So that should be somewhere in the world of a 1 to 3, maybe a 5-year plan. And then you back into what would that look like? If I was going to be in graduate school in 3 years, what do I need to be doing today? If I'm going to be working in this position or in this field, what do I need to be doing today? And then, like I said, create milestones, celebrate all the victories, forget about all the failures. And last note on mentors and advisors is reciprocity. This is not a one-way relationship. Mentors are not doing you a solid. You actually think it's about you. It's actually not just about you. They win when you win. The experience of being a mentor and watching the people that you mentor and advise win is so rewarding. You are the fulfillment of their big commitment. So you can actually ask them, what would it look like for this relationship to be a win for you? And they'll say, hey, if we can get you across the stage and in graduate school next year, that'd be a win for me. And you can be a valuable resource also to your mentors if you choose to be. From underling to colleague, as you start to contemplate what's next, you probably don't realize just how much power, how much influence that you have, how critical you are to whatever is happening next in the landscape. You are the future of all of it. And I always tell people, don't wait for people to step aside. You step up. And my mom used to say it, if it is to be, it's up to me. You like how I quoted that, my mama? Yeah, don't wait for somebody to give you the chance to shine. You gotta sort of, be willing to be courageous and take that step for yourself. And then you take those select opportunities to move up the food chain. When I was an undergraduate, I ended up one of the people that was on our research team, who was a master's level project coordinator, had some behavioral health challenges and was out of our environment for about 18 months. And our then work group leader looked around and said, well, and that person said, oh, not me. We had a couple postdocs, a couple junior faculty, a couple other master's level coordinators. This was a pretty big project. It was called the ABC study, Aging, Brain Function, and Cognition. They were given MRIs to folks over time to see how, changes in, brain activity is measured through MRIs and AMRIs, were related to cognitive functioning. Nothing that was in my area of expertise, but it was about the project needed somebody to run the project. And when they looked around, the only person that had bandwidth was me. And I was a junior in college. And he said, all right, you, Deb, you're going to fill in for her until and we thought she'd be gone for like 3 or 4 months. She was gone for 18 months. And I ended up being the project coordinator as a junior for the ABC study, which ended up being like a world-renowned study. So you take those opportunities to move up the food chain. You can also say no. If something doesn't make sense, you just be a no to it. But I don't mean just be a no to the things in your professional life. Most of the things you need to be a no to are the things in your personal life. And you probably don't want to hear that. But it really won't make sense if I always tell people it's about some kind of balance. So if you're having a whole lot of fun and you're not really hitting those markers on that 1 to 3, 5-year plan, chances are you haven't said no to enough stuff on this side of the scale, right? And it's not a bad thing. You have your entire life to have a great time. And I will tell you, you will have a lot better time with your education under your belt, with strong relationships with mentors, with a really bang up resume bio, making a good salary and all of that than you ever will as a struggling undergraduate or graduate student. Fun is so much better when you have money. And then always be a good colleague and seek out colleagues. And this is a picture that I took the second picture. This is my cousin. These are two of my cousins. That's my cousin Ray, and that's my cousin Nia. I took this picture at my house about 6-7 years ago, and this was a picture at Nia's 3rd birthday party. Like, everybody grows up. I didn't even realize when I took the picture that I had this picture sort of in my arsenal. But how cute. Here we are. He's about 8. He's about 9, and she's 3. And here they are, 30 years later. She's actually in her next to last year in a clinical neuroscience program at Wayne State. And he's a restaurateur in DC. So we all grow up. You all grow up. But you don't think about that when you're here, that eventually you're going to be here. But I'm asking you to just sort of think about that, because it's the things that you do today that are going to determine what the windy road looks like for you from here to here. A couple quick leadership lessons. Probably the most important thing that I've learned for myself is being authentically myself. There's one Deborah. I'm the same way. My daughter's here, she could maybe attest to it. I'm the same way at home, I'm the same way at work, I'm the same way at church, I'm the same way everywhere. And that was probably the hardest thing for me to figure out. Have you ever felt like you've got multiple yous? There's the you that you present to your parents, there's the one you present to your professors, there's the one that you present in your fraternity house, there's the one that you present to your girlfriend, there's the one you present to her parents. That's a lot. Like, it's a lot of work to make sure you got the right face on and there's something really powerful when you really figure out who you are, and who that person is somebody that you can just bring with you everywhere you go and let that person shine through. And so I call that being, I keep hitting the wrong button. I call that being unapologetically me. I am unapologetically me. And I get to be that not because somebody granted me permission to be that. I decided that that mattered for me. That was a part of my well-being. That was a part of what I thought was important for me to be unleashed and let loose to make the difference that I wanted to make in the world. It is the biggest gift I've ever given myself, is the freedom to be me unapologetically. And I ask you all to just take a look at that for yourself. Leadership is also a calling. It's nothing that you have to take on. If every single human being on the planet was a leader, nothing would get done, because we'd all be out in front pontificating with our big ideas and, like that, and nothing would ever get done. It is a calling, and you have a choice. Answering the call of leadership really is your choice. If it's something that in you, I'm assuming because you're in this program, there's something in you that is in your gut. There's some stirring up, and you're trying to figure out what that is. The key to that is, I say, without integrity, nothing works. Here's what I found. When I became the director of the Division of Public Health, I had a full plate already. I have about a $14, $15 million research portfolio that I run. My division is a great division. It was pretty new. There was really nobody at the helm for a couple years, so there was a lot of work that I had to do to get that back on track. And so when I took on being the division director, things started to fall out. I'm late getting reports in. I got papers where before I was I'm getting papers out, 1 or 2 a month. And now it's like taking me 3 months to get one paper out, and I'm missing deadlines. And I realized I took on more work, but I didn't expand my table of integrity to be able to hold that work. I started off with a full plate, so I actually had to upgrade that plate to a platter. That's how that works. If you take something on, you have to actually expand your plate of integrity to be able to get things done. You don't have to give things up per se, right? People say, well, there's only so much time in a day, so you have to give that up, and you have to. And no, my thing is, it's like, if you say yes to something, what will it take to be a yes, right? You might say, yes, sure, I'll help you move. But then if something comes up and you're also the president of the student council and an emergency happens on campus and you get called into a meeting on a Saturday, you're going to have to figure out how to get your word honored to help your friend move and also be at that council meeting. So somebody's going to have to cover you in one of those places. So if you take on more responsibility, you also need a bigger network of support. You've got to develop a much more powerful relationship to your word and to yourself. And so I always say, as you expand your work and your responsibility, you need a larger table of integrity, because integrity is the foundation for all of it. And it is very possible. And my thing is, I love people who say, I want to have it all. And you can have it all. But without integrity, nothing works. All right, balance. What it's not. We talk about leadership. Balance is something that I think is a very interesting phenomenon. Mostly when people talk about it, they talk about it like it's Acapulco. Like, I got to get to balance. And I'm like, no, it's not a destination. It's not a goal. It's not a place to get to. What is it? It's a value. You say, it matters to me. I actually want to be great at work, and I also want to be great at home. I want to have a great social life. I want to have a great family life. Balance is a goal. I mean, it's a value. It's also a practice. It's something that if you're up to a lot in life, it will be falling out constantly. But if it's something that you value, you stay in the practice of how to keep putting it back in. And it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to have the kind of life that you love, where you get to do all the things that you want to do, and also model for other people the opportunity to have it all. This is my last slide. I see you coming over here, Chad. This is my last slide. This is my sense of balance. That's my 20-year-old daughter, Jordan. That is my almost 19-year-old son, Gabriel, who'll be 19 in 2 weeks. And that is my now 16-year-old daughter, Olivia. I don't know what those things are for you, but I think you should figure out what it is that really matters to you and what calls you forward. And it can be your commitment to family, community. It could be fitness. It could be spirituality. It could be the self-expression. It could be in your career. But always have those things in front of you and have them pulling you forward, because those are the places where you're going to look back to and lean on when it gets hard. Because you guys have raised your hand for something that, you know, I'm assuming there's a lot more people on campus than the folks in this room, right? You all gave up something to be here. And for that, I do say thank you. Thank you for letting me share with you. But it's important that you know what those things are for you, because in those tough moments, they're going to be the things that you pull back to. And this is the end for me. This is my former president, Luana Simon, who I think got a bum deal at MSU, but she was a real class act to me. And that is my provost, June Hewitt. And if you would have told me when I was, you know, back in that Nia and Ray photo, that I'd be standing here as an endowed professor, you know, in the Public Health Honor Society at Hopkins, leading the charge for MSU, inspiring and motivating, you know, undergraduates and graduate students all across the globe, I would have said no way. But it's a great honor and a privilege, so thank you.
I'm Melina Frantiskakis. I am a second-year CLA fellow, and I study cell and molecular biology. And I want to become a physician scientist, so research is really important to me.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could shed some light on how scientists can better communicate, not only with each other, but with the community and with people in the medical profession.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will tell you, in my unit, and I encourage you to look her up, Dr. Mona Hana-Atisha.
Okay.
She's a pediatrician and a public health researcher. So I'm in public health,
Awesome.
so I know a lot about that, but this whole movement of physician scientists is like amazing to me. The thing that I think is really great about that in this current day and age is there are actually programs designed for that. Mm-hmm. You know, the folks 20 years, 30 years ago who wanted to do what you do, they had to sort of like engineer it themselves. So I would say seek out programs that are designed for that, and lots of places have those. And then that component around how to sort of then engage and interact with community, there really are growing programs for that. And so I would say seek out a program that has that as a core value. And if not, get a great mentor. Find someone who is doing that successfully and have them help you navigate that process. I really do think it's the future of medicine. So thanks for that
Thank
question.
you so much for your talk.
Yep.
Hi, how are you?
Great.
Great. My name's Trevor. I'm a junior fellow here at the CLA. Just want to say thank you for sharing some of your expertise with us. Something more specifically that I'd like to get out of this opportunity. My major is public relations. I'm super into community relations. So that facet of public health where you're engaging with the community, where you're out there kind of building, fostering those relationships. I'm just curious, like either in your curriculum, your mentor experiences, or just any of your life experience, career experience, where you built community relations building skills, if that's something that came naturally, or how you kind of refined and growed that process is a little bit. Just a tidbit would be great.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you asked that. I had some extra slides.
Love it. Love it.
I was like, in case they ask me about my own work.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And this is something that we're literally publishing. It's coming out in the American Journal of Public Health. This notion around community engagement, I think, is so important.
Yeah.
I always tell people we shouldn't, and you've all heard different things about the Flint water crisis. I will tell you, one of the biggest injustices around that is even as the solutions came into place, they were mostly being done to people.
Yeah.
And on their behalf and for them, but not with them. As if people don't have a sense of what their own needs are and don't have a voice and don't want to be at the table and building solutions for themselves. So what we've done is I actually have created what I call this collective impact model. So I'm not the author of Collective Impact, but what I did is I married community engagement with collective impact. And I think there are some key things that we need to consider as we think about how to engage with community. And I'm talking about research, but it could be around anything. It could be around services, allocation or distribution of resources, et cetera. The thing is, it's like with anything, you have to build relationships with people. And when I came to Flint, my experience was like married at first sight. Like I literally I came there, I got sort of swept away, and I entered into these relationships with folks without a whole lot of background. But these contextual factors are so important. History, trust, relationship building, respect, and transparency. And the reason I put that at the bottom is because it's, to me, the foundation that holds all that stuff up. But then if you think about what would be the weight on top or also the cloud that could lift it up, I call these the equity indicators. Things like power and control, decision-making, influence, mutual benefit, resource sharing, responsibility, and ownership. So I probably have about, on my center, the Flint Center for Health Equity Solutions, I probably have about 30 grassroots community organizations that I work with on that. We are constantly tending to these factors. And then we do a frequent check-in. Where are we on this continuum? Not everything necessarily lends itself well to community leading, but clearly things could be community informed, community initiated, community consulted. So if you say it's a value, it's like an ongoing process to tend to these contextual factors and to acknowledge when they don't exist. The hardest thing that I had to face, and you will deal with this also, is you don't see yourself as Grand Valley State University. You're like, I'm Trevor. But in the community, you're Grand Valley State University. I came from Johns Hopkins University. Anybody see The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks? I'll tell you, in the streets of Baltimore, you say Johns Hopkins University, and immediately people go to, oh, you know, they used to pick people up off the street and take them in for experiments, and then Henrietta Lacks came, which that's not entirely quite how it went, but it's in that ballpark. I mean, Hopkins, you know, the medical community has done some things that, you know, are pretty egregious to communities, especially communities of color, right? So you also have to be able to balance this perspective of individual and institution. Because the reality is, if you're doing community relations for Grand Valley State University, I live in the city of Flint. I'm on Flint water. But when I go to the table and I try to say I'm community, people are like, you work at MSU. You're Michigan State University. So I no longer try to get away from that. I'm just responsible for that and what that means. And I do this kind of work. I look at what is the history. And it's not the history that Deborah has with community. It's the history that institution has with community. Because when community sees me, even though I look like them, I sound like them, I live where they live, I go to church where they go to church, at that table when we're trying to figure out what next, for the recovery of Flint, they see Michigan State University. So I think this model is really important because when you know that, you don't try to get away from the history. It's nothing to be ashamed about or it's nothing you have to hide from. But then you start to deal with the things that are in your hand, the trust, the relationship building, and you do it as an institutional representative. So I do think the value and the necessity for community at those tables and the academic community partnership is so important. And I think, and I know they're doing it here, it's not even a plug for your program. Our public health program at Michigan State University is got a central focus on community engagement and community partnership. Our public health division is uniquely focused on that. We have an office of community outreach and engagement. I know you have something similar here. There are principles and best practices for how to do this. And I feel like if you were a physician or if you were somebody who wanted to be a physician, you wouldn't just walk into a hospital and say, oh, you guys got any babies that need to be delivered? I'm pretty smart. I think I can do this. But we will do that when it comes to community engagement. People think having a big heart, and some bright ideas is sufficient. But it's not. We have real principles and practices for how to do that well. And we also have good systems and structures in place at the institution to train people to do that. So yeah, yep.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name's Michelle. Thank you so much again. I guess I wanted a follow-up question from that discussion about, representing myself, but also Grand Valley State University or a community or whatever the case may be. What is your advice then for kind of that next step if someone's like, you're not from here, you're from University of, or Michigan State University, like what is your approach to being like, well, that is true, either I know where you're coming from, I live in that area, I identify with that, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, so it's the same with any relationship. Anybody ever been in a relationship where the other person wasn't that into you? I'm serious, right? Like I've been in some community partnerships where they just weren't that into me. It's like, no problem. Similarly, I've been in some, community partnerships where I really wasn't that into them. No problem. Doesn't mean they're a bad organization or agency or whatever. Fit really does matter when it comes to that stuff. I do think there's a especially heightened responsibility for institutional representatives, whether you be an administrator, a faculty member, a student, or a staff person, to just be responsible for how your institution occurs for the community. Because your immediate, sort of knee-jerk would be to be a person and to defend yourself and say, well, I'm from this community too, or I'm underserved, or where I came from, we dealt with similar issues and I did great work there, and that actually won't make a difference a lot of times in those real-time conversations. So one of the best practices that I've found is to actually just listen and make sure that you really understand what matters in the partnership for your partners and look to see for yourself if it's a fit. Because it could very well be that that is not the right table for you to be sitting at, right? So it's just like, okay, they're not that into me, I'm not that into them. Or they're not that into me because they don't really know who I am, or they don't really know the sort of shift that's happening in the movement at Grand Valley State that I'm going to be a critical part of. And then you have to exercise patience. One of the things about your generation, and my generation had it too, is that we are very impatient. People say all the time, well, I worked really hard on this and I haven't seen any progress. And it's like, are you kidding me? I always use the example of Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells' big thing was she wanted anti-lynching legislation. And we still have double-digit states in the US that do not have anti-lynching legislation. She worked her entire life to get that like in place, and she died and she never got to see it. Do you think she was complaining about, oh, poor me, they won't put anti-lynching legislation in North Carolina, so I'm just gonna throw the towel in? No, she stood for what she believed in. So I think if I could give you something else, it's like, stand for what you believe in and stand for what you know, and you forfeit your right to necessarily see it all take hold in your lifetime. But trust that you matter and that the work that you're doing is gonna make a difference. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi there.
Hi.
My name is Paige. I am a fellow of the Cook Leadership Academy as well. I'm also an aspiring neuroscientist, and
Hey!
I'm in the research field right now, and I'm going into that for my master's and my PhD. But I find that I'm doubting myself a lot in the laboratory, and I don't necessarily feel autonomy, and so I'm very intimidated by scientists who have all these grants under their belts and whatnot.
Yeah.
But was there a moment in your career where you kind of realized your own worth? And is there any advice that you would give to aspiring scientists or those who are coming in with not so much experience but aspire to be, well accomplished across society?
Yeah, that is like so perfect, and I appreciate you, just asking that question, because it takes a lot to acknowledge that. And I don't know if you have any particular experiences around gender, but especially I know women are very, very underrepresented in neuroscience. And so I know it can be very intimidating. And I'll tell you, the very first publication that I wrote, I was an undergraduate. And I gave it to my mentor, who I, to this day, love and appreciate deeply. And he used to do the treadmill in the morning. And he would put back then, literally, if you can believe, we did everything on paper. So he would print it out, and then there was no track changes. He would, literally like write in little, we all knew like shorthand, and he'd put a little character saying insert something here and strike through, and we did it all manually. And he would, walk on the treadmill early in the morning, and he would mark up papers. And the very first paper that I submitted, now I'm thinking, I'm big stuff. I'm now a senior. My colleague kind of went off the rails, and I've been running the ABC study for a year. Like, if I was doubting myself, I now got a little wind beneath my wings, chest popped out, and I wrote my very first, sort of me-driven publication. And he literally had so much markup on it, and he used to do it with a red felt pen. And then at some point, he just put a big X over all of it. And he wrote an arrow to flip it over. And he had rewritten the entire first page on the back in red felt pen. Then he got about halfway through page 2, same thing. It's so many markups. I can't even decipher the edits, because he's just rewritten the whole thing. And then he drew a line halfway through page 2, and he said, "Too painful to continue." And just in case I had a drop of self-esteem left, the comment he wrote on the front of the paper was, "Not fit for the weekly reader. Start over." And I don't know if you all know, you know what the weekly reader is? This little, paper that you get in elementary school. You pay $3 and you get it every week or whatever. Not fit for the weekly reader. Start over. And I saw that, right? And he literally comes in, throws it in my box. I didn't even see it. I sort of knew it was there, but I was like, I'm gonna get it at the end of the day. I'm gonna take it home and I'm gonna read my edits to my first paper. Oh my God, I'm big stuff. And that's the first thing I saw, all the markups and that comment. And I was crushed. I was crushed. And before I could it literally felt like a little thin glass vase, and somebody had hit me with a pebble, and I was standing there and I could feel all the glass starting to shatter, and I was falling to pieces. And I caught myself, and I just wanted to get out of the building because I didn't want to burst out into tears standing right there. And as I'm rushing to get to the elevator, my chair, who's the coolest guy ever, it's 6 at night, he's in his office, he's got Bob Marley playing. He's got no shoes on. He's like an old hippie dude, but he's like super smart. He's walking down the hall and he catches me and I'm like, and he just like bumped into me and I just burst out into tears. He's like, what is wrong? He walks me back to his office. He literally has Bob Marley playing and he has no shoes on. He just has on his socks. It's like 6, 7 o'clock. No one's there except Jim, Bill Eaton, and myself. And I said, I said, this is like so, I was like, it's one thing to give me feedback. Like, this is like soul crushing, right? And he says, Deb, do you know the time and attention it must have taken Jim to give you all of these edits? Like, yeah, that was kind of jerky to say it that way. But the time and attention that it takes to give this kind of feedback, he would do that because he thinks you're worth it. So if you want to be in this field, you want to be in the academy, he's like, you're going to have to toughen up and get slightly thicker skin. And I still felt like it was a jerky move, right? I mean, this man, though, it turned out like I got my day at the White House with George Bush. I got to take one person with me, and I took him. Because professionally, he was the one who walked with me through all those spaces and all that windy road. So literally, the things I told you, celebrate all the victories, forget about all the failures, find a great mentor, at least have somebody in your midst who will mentor you and help you put all of it in perspective. That really is the access for me. It really is access. And I hate to say this, but for the women, we got to get just a little toughness on our skin. But I also, and men, close your ears for a second. I one another with other women leaders a lot because I think it's especially tough for women leaders in this environment because men dominate and they're just doing them and being however they're being. And they don't understand, nor do they have to or have a big stake in understanding what the experience is for women in these environments. So I one another with other women leaders a lot because they do understand. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Hi.
My name is Sam. I'm a communication studies major. I'm a fellow as well. And I was wondering if you had any tips for us as we start our new year for academic writing. Someone who doesn't really know how to get into academic writing, and it's kind of something that I'd like to do better at. Do you have any tips for us on editing, knowing how much is too much, how much is too little, stuff like that?
Yeah, okay, I do have some tips. So today is actually my writing day. Friday is my writing day. I didn't get much writing done today because I was traveling and then I had to drive to Grand Rapids. So you actually, if you want to be a writer, it's like with anything, right? You ever ran a marathon or taken on some big physical challenge in your life? She's like, no. Well, I did a half marathon a few years back, and I did what's called the Couch to 5K program first, and then I did the 5K to half marathon program. You have to train and practice for anything that's outside of your wheelhouse, for the wheelhouse talk. You have to train and practice for it. So you have to have dedicated time set aside for it, and you need a structure for fulfillment. So if you want to get better at writing, you've got to get in a formal structure that's going to give you an opportunity to write. So look around, ask your department chair or your faculty mentor, are there writing work groups in the department? Does your mentor have projects that you could get engaged in, right? How I involve my students, it's like wax on, wax off. I have them start by writing background sections and lit reviews. And then I have them working on methods. And then they learn to write results, and then they learn to write discussion sections. Now, I would never be so crass as to say not fit for the weekly reader, but what I don't do is I don't have people go all the way. We do it in literally like the paint by numbers. Remember paint by numbers? You used to connect 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you fill in all the A's yellow and all the B's purple and all. And then eventually you start to see a meadow and a unicorn and a rainbow and the picture starts to take shape. Yeah. That's how you want to take writing on. You want to get yourself in a structure that gets you the opportunity to both practice and get feedback without spending a whole inordinate amount of time. So you want to get small, short products with good feedback and the opportunity to improve and stay in that ongoing feedback process. But you need a formal structure. Yeah. And that could either be a writing group. If that doesn't exist, get with the mentor who's willing to support you. And I think the best way to do it is through apprenticeship. You know, there's something about, you already are all getting all the didactic stuff. Somebody standing up at the chum, yum, 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 and you got to memorize, regurgitate, and, you know, and all of that. There's something really powerful about actually doing the work, working on a project or a paper or a particular initiative with somebody who's actually doing it. It will give you the, I think, biggest value and learning lesson. But you also have to be up for feedback, and you have to be highly coachable, because nobody has the time to tend to your feelings when I say this is far to the left from what I needed. This is what I need. This bit worked, but this was too much. This is unscientific. You know, you need to have references at the end of each of these statements like that. When somebody does that and gives it back to you, the only right answer is got it. And then you go and you do it, and then you bring it back. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, okay. I think we have gone way over on time. Is it good for you? It's good for me.
Professor Verholden, thanks so much for your time and for being with us today. All the fellows and our community members, I hope you'll join us for the reception just outside. We are adjourned.